And the poem is Anne Spencer's Earth, I Thank You. I'm going to read it aloud. Then I'm going to ask Erica to reread it or recite it. So we'll have it in the record twice orally, and then Erica can begin. Anne Spencer was really well known. She's older than most of the Harlem Renaissance poets. She was well known for having an amazing, a splendid garden, and for insisting that the Harlem Renaissance had to include non-urban topics and non-urban people. And she invited so many of the major figures across ideologies to her garden. And she would preside somewhat maternally over this movement. And she really cared about the way the garden worked as a metaphor. And those of you who've read Jean Toomer's Cane, amazing book of mixed genres, will probably see an influence from Anne Spencer, I believe. So I'll read it, then Erica will read it, and then Erica, Lily, Jake, Max will just offer a comment. Anne Spencer, Earth, I thank you. Earth, I thank you for the pleasure of your language. You've had a hard time bringing it to me from the ground, to grunt through the noun, to all the way feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, awareness. I am here. Okay, Erica, will you recite it and then comment in any way you like?
Earth, I thank you. Earth, I thank you for the pleasure of your language. You've had a hard time bringing it to me from the ground, to grunt through the noun, to all the way feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, awareness. I am here. I think one of the things that I love so much about this poem is the way that she's using her line breaks. Like it takes us back to Imagism and to Williams, but it also takes us forward in time, and it reads to me as a really radical take on what an eco poem is. My favorite moment is to grunt through the noun, which is such an interesting and amazing line. So those are my first thoughts, Al.
Thank you, Erica. Lily and then Jake.
Yes, I for some reason when I read grunt through the noun, I often like replace noun with name, and I think about this as the speaker putting themselves into a almost like a growth like you would see in a garden, I guess, of like starting with just a name and then through language and through some really interesting like linguistic sensory experience that's like all the way feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, creating and inhabiting a self and an identity throughout their lifetime that is somehow triangulated through both language and the garden and our connection to like the natural world.
Nice. Thank you, Lily. Jake and then Max.
Yeah, two things. I mean, just obviously, I'm also taken by the grunt through noun line, and and I'm in general just into grunting. Like grunts are great, and
hey Jake, can you grunt for us, please?
How's that? I mean, yeah, like I think a grunt is an expression of like pleasure, but also complaint. And like, oh, it's hard and it's just messed up, but it's also good. Like, it's catharsis of a sort. And then like, obviously it's beyond language, but to get to the right noun, and extract the grunt from it is very satisfying. And I think the line breaks that Erica referenced, they help create that sense, that extraction of pleasure, slow extraction from each line. And one more quick thing is I think the last line is a biblical reference there. Like there are various biblical characters who say, like in these epic moments, Adam and Abraham, etc. I am here. Like, so it's sort of like a kind of like maybe a spiritual prayer like moment that's in there at the end.
Nice. And if you put Erica's observation that this goes back a little bit to imagism and to Williams, with Lily's thought that is, in a way, eco-poetry, and Jake's comment that something is being painfully brought into being, that's what growth, that's what natural growth is. That's why William Carlos Williams pulled over to the side of the road, on the way to the Contagion Hospital, and watches this stuff grunt its way into existence. There's always, he's a little obsessed with birth. There's always a birth and growth, but it's necessary and it's seasonal. Max, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Al?
Good. And you're starting to organize the people in Berlin and vicinity, it seems.
Yes. Organizing them, yes. There's a long history of organizing papers.
Your thoughts?
I think this poem's a great addition to the sub-theme in ModPo, or one of the many sub-themes of among them being work as poetry or poetry as work, which I think we get a very clear and early example of in the Grandfather Advised Me poem by Lauren Niedecker, and which I think we'll see a lot more of next week, and also in week 7 when we get to the Beats and the New York School, since this is like a big preoccupation for them. And I think with this poem, the revision that this poem offers to the example of Niedecker and to also the Beats in New York School is that this poem sort of sees, it takes poetry's work outside of this kind of obvious clerical working context of like being at a typewriter or like in an office or something, and already doing like white collar work, and instead it puts it in this like agricultural context and sort of asks us to sort of rethink like what intellectual labor can be, that it doesn't necessarily need to be sitting at a desk and condensing, right? And I think that the additional provocation too is that she sort of flips the work relationship with the earth, that the earth is doing this kind of, the earth is the one that's doing the work, that's doing the labor, and we, can sort of relish in it, enjoy it in a way. So I think those are important sort of context to and revisions of, I think, the sub-theme that starts to emerge even more in the coming weeks.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is a praise poem. Thank you, Earth, for the pleasure of your language. I'm getting language. I'm able to write because of you, Earth. Thanks. There's something very terrestrial about this poetry.